Hi there, this is John Kerecz, and I'm here on OSH Radio with the chairman of the United States Transhumanist Party, and we've had the young man or gentleman, young to me, but on before. I always like him to say his name because I never like killing someone's name. So if you're to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we get started talking about things.
All right. Thank you, John. It's an honor to be here again. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and as you mentioned, I'm the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. I have been the chairman since November of 2016, so a bit over 5 years now. And we strive to advance science, technology, and health within American politics. We strive to pursue radical life extension and attain it for ourselves, hopefully within our lifetimes, as well as our contemporaries. We strive for a society and culture that embrace reason, science, and secular values. And we also strive for the use of science, technology, and rational discourse to reduce and eliminate the existential risks facing the human species. So we are the party of techno-optimism. We are the people who seek to accelerate technological progress for the benefit of humankind.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we had done 2 talks before, one before the election and one after. And now this is January 2022, and I thought it would be good to get you back and see what you thought of what has happened, and also see what your prediction and what things you're going to be working on going into the year 2022. Previously, we were talking about some of my concerns. You know, we're still going through COVID. I'm finding people are not as responsive, and I think that's, we were talking about how that's probably because they don't know what's still going to happen, especially with the newest version coming around. And I've seen a lot of friends and family die through the past 2 years, but to tell you the truth, it's not been from COVID. It's been mostly from cancer. And so I've started saying lately, I want to see them come up with some vaccines for cancer, not just for COVID, because I've been seeing so many people pass away from different cancers and stuff. And we were talking about that too. I was talking about Explore Mars, and the person that was my immediate boss for them, she passed away from cancer. And just this year, somebody I graduated from high school, just already within the past week, died of cancer, and somebody I worked with at my part-time job right before Christmas, and he looked fine. And so cancer is a real thing. I'd like to see them do more work on that. I think if we are going to want to live longer, I think there's a lot of things. Cancer is one of those things I think we find it kills more people because we live longer now. And because of our lifespan having been getting longer, things that we didn't live old enough to have affect us now affect us. So that's one thing I'd like to see them spend more time on. Of course, you know, cancer, heart attacks. That's one of the things that really gets people a lot, and I'd like to see them spend time on that. But that's just my little thing because of the losses I've had. But so what do you think? We're here now. We are in 2022. What do you think so far? Is it what you thought it would be, or has it? Are there some things that really kind of threw you, maybe some curveballs you didn't see coming?
It definitely is not what I thought it would be, John. And first of all, I want to offer my condolences because cancer is a terrible killer, and I knew a few people who died of cancer over the past year as well. And it is always quite tragic. Cancer is one of those killers that, although it does tend to statistically affect more older people than younger people, it also can affect younger people. And that's also quite tragic. I believe that more of humanity's resources need to be devoted toward the fight against disease and death. And yes, not just COVID, other conditions as well. Unfortunately, during this pandemic, there's been so much focus on COVID that other terrible diseases, other killers have in some ways fallen by the wayside, or some people have not been able to access the medical system to the extent that they should have because of various disruptions. And that is also quite tragic. I think we need a mass mobilization of resources to create a lot more capacity in the medical system. And that's what the US Transhumanist Party has been advocating for: the mass construction of hospitals, the creation of emergency stockpiles of supplies, the training of new medical personnel so that we can deal with these kinds of conditions more effectively. And of course, the acceleration of medical research as well. But in regard to your question about 2021 and what my expectations were, to be honest, I expected that this pandemic would be over in 2021 because I thought the initial rollout of vaccinations finally in early 2021 would be the beginning of the end of the pandemic. So if enough of the population became fully vaccinated, then my hope was the novel coronavirus would die out. And this didn't happen because of the mutated variants, the Delta variant, and now the Omicron variant. And that has injected a lot of uncertainty into people's expectations of the future, as well as how people approach day-to-day life. Because for a few months after becoming fully vaccinated, my thinking was essentially, for me, the pandemic was just about over. And while I would wear masks in public places, if required to do so, generally speaking, I was expecting to just go about living my life, resuming a lot of the pre-pandemic activities. And now we have a situation where we have a variant that can affect people who are fully vaccinated. And we are still better protected than those who are not. But that once again injects this significant risk calculus into one's daily decisions. So does one go to this event? How much time does one spend indoors? What sorts of protective equipment does one wear? And what will the future be like? What will it be like in a month from now? In some countries, there's a sharp drop-off in the Omicron COVID infections. In other countries, the curve of infections is rising very steeply, and time will tell how quickly that will subside. I just wish everyone the best in getting through this and in making sure that you stay safe and stay around to experience the future of humanity. I really think this time that we're living through right now is the make or break epoch of human history. That is, if we can get through this particular moment in history, this pandemic and the accompanying societal and political and economic disruptions in fairly good shape, and I can elaborate on what I mean by that, then the future is bright. But there have been eras in history when pandemics have resulted in dramatic declines in a society. For instance, the various plagues during the Roman Empire, the Antonine Plague in the 160s and the plague of Justinian in the 530s, led to prolonged periods of crisis and collapse. So I hope we don't get into that kind of downward spiral. But what do I mean by emerging in fairly good shape? What I mean is that our infrastructure, our technology, and our institutions will remain fairly intact, not unchanged, because we need to learn and adapt and become more robust and resilient, but essentially not collapsed either. So we don't want massive breakdowns in transportation or communication or food supply. We don't want riots in the streets, especially because we've seen a taste of how destructive those can be. And of course, we don't want masses of people perishing from disease either. We want life expectancy to go up again. And we've lost about 2 years of life expectancy as a result of this pandemic. So we need to quickly regain those. I hope this will happen. But it is only through the application of science and technology and better policies that encourage the deployment of medical technologies that we can get through this as a world.
Like you were saying, some of the things I think we're doing now I think, come at a good time for some reasons. Right now, space exploration looks like it could be opening up. And I actually think the fact that we're used to communicating now, Skyping, Zooming, doing all this stuff remotely, is going to prepare man for when you're in space and the only way you contact other people is through this way, remotely through the computer. So I think it's getting people used to that, which could be a good thing as far as colonizing space, which is always one of my big things. But it is funny how people do a change, and even in the old days, a couple things are funny where they say, kids spend too much time on the computer, they don't make real relationships, and now it's like, well, on the computer it is a real relationship. It's funny how the opinion changed. I saw something the other day where people were making fun of you're raised, don't get in cars with strangers, and then it is don't talk on the computer too much, but now we hire Ubers to strangers to come in Ubers and drive us places. So it's kind of funny how things have changed and they come around, and it's a lot different. Of course, you can track people a lot differently now too, and it is interesting how technology is changing. I also saw something the other day where they were complaining about cars getting stuck in the snow during one snowstorm, and they said, "Oh, well, imagine if most of these cars were all electric and they'd be stuck there and they'd run out of power." And I thought to myself, well, by the time all those cars are electric, all the maintenance vehicles that come out to help with cars, they're going to have batteries and storage units and jumpers. It's going to be a different time just because everybody has more cars. And I thought, well, I bet you when cars came out, everybody on their horse and buggies and their sleds with their horses were complaining about the cars running out of gas on the road and being in their way. So, the technology progresses, and sometimes man still complains. But I think there are some things that have come out of this that I think are going to be good for us moving ahead, but a lot of things that aren't, that worry me. I always, like with 9/11, I worry about when that happened, I worried about freedoms that people had that kind of got taken away, and then the younger people don't know, they were freedoms they never knew about. To them, this is how the world was. And that to me sometimes worries me, because then you feel like you're getting old and you're going to say, oh, when I was this age, but you didn't have to worry about this or do this. And that I feel sorry for that. I mean, I feel sorry for how things change, and people might not know about how things were. I like progress, but yet I also sometimes miss some of the other things too. It'd be nice in this world if we can always have a nice balance. Now, you live in a nice area where I think you're kind of out in an area where you're not very heavily populated where you are you?
Well, in northern Nevada, the population has certainly been growing. It's not as dense as in many major cities or their suburbs, but we've had a large influx of people coming in from California because the cost of living in California is so high. And it has unfortunately pushed up the housing market to levels that are now unaffordable to many people here as well. So we are seeing some shifts. And as you pointed out, there has been a great deal of technological adaptation during this pandemic that has in many ways softened the blow and helped people get through a difficult time. But there have also been some deleterious effects, and you described some of them. I would like to point out an excerpt from the Transhumanist Declaration, which states that although all progress is change, not all change is progress. So it takes wisdom and discernment to essentially distinguish between what changes do constitute progress. And generally speaking, technology offers people tools. And if used rationally, those tools can empower people. They can extend their opportunities, their ability to reach out to others and have meaningful conversations, as we are having right now, and form connections that will help people later on overcome difficulties or expand their knowledge or expand what they're able to achieve. But on the other hand, there are some worrying phenomena as well. The rise of mass surveillance, for example, the rise of algorithmic censorship on social media, which I know you and I have both faced recently. And that would be a misuse of technology. That would be a lack of clear, rational thinking applied to that technology, because some people might think, oh, this social network is short-staffed, so why not use algorithms instead of people to police speech and, let's say, get rid of objectionable content under whatever criteria. The problem is, even if you have fairly decent criteria, like, for instance, no hate speech against people just based on circumstances that they have no control over, I think it's within the rights of a social network to institute that policy. But if you have an algorithm, that algorithm doesn't have the judgment, the discernment of a human being. So if a human being writes something that is satirical, for instance, and mocks the purveyors of hate speech, or if a human being perhaps just uses certain keywords inadvertently, and the algorithm latches onto those keywords, then that person's post gets censored. That person might have some restrictions on their account, and often there's no due process. There's no opportunity for appeal. It makes me appreciate the American justice system when the government attempts to impose certain sanctions on people, because there, at least, there is a clear due process. People have rights if they're accused of something, or if the government wants to deprive them of something, there is at least a procedure, a way for them to know what they did wrong, a particular pathway where they can communicate with human beings, however convoluted that process might be at times, however expensive it might be at times. At least it's still due process. And one of the issues we have with the way that control over certain technologies is concentrated in just a few social media companies these days is that these rights of due process are not present, and often the social media companies don't care if they lose participants because they have so many. So I think we need to have a conversation as a society about the role of these social media organizations. And given that they provide a service which is essentially like a public square, where a lot of people go to exercise their rights of free speech, I think the standards that apply to them should be different from the standards that apply to a private publication like a blog or a smaller website where a community governs itself and has the right to establish its own rules. I think the expectations of a public square should be a lot more permissive. Just like if you go to a public park and you say something that the government disapproves of, or even if you misrepresent the facts for whatever reason, it's still your right to go to that public park and say something that many people might disagree with, or many people might even find absurd or offensive in some way, or untruthful in some way. Still, we don't have free speech to protect popular speech. We have the right of free speech to protect unpopular speech, precisely because we often don't know what is or is not correct. We don't have full knowledge, and the world is uncertain. The facts around us evolve all the time, and we need a number of voices, a number of perspectives, so that we can continue to essentially process what's happening and consider the possibilities of what it could be. So I think the Transhumanist Party can take the lead in having these discussions, as we have during our Virtual Enlightenment Salons every Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern time. We bring the kinds of guests who offer these heterodox perspectives, so to speak, where they're not afraid sometimes to depart from the mainstream, but they always try to ground their perspectives in sound reasoning, science, logic, and hope for humanity. So I want those kinds of discussions to be more prevalent, and for us to find better platforms, better tools to have those discussions safely without fear of censorship.
Yeah, all good points. Yeah, I feel that way too. It is, sometimes I think too, as far as opinions, sometimes it's good for people to hear different opinions. It's just sometimes when it's, it can get lopsided. But it sort of reminds me of like you're a child and you have two parents. And I always think it's good when your parents are not totally on the same wavelength, because you as a child get to see different points of view, even within your home. You don't want it to be to the point where they argue. You just want it to be that you see different points of view. So I think it's good for us all to see and hear different points of view, but not. Sometimes it gets very lopsided. And we all know that certain news stations, certain things, certain newspapers, they lean one way or the other, and they very much are subjective. That's not really good. So it is like you said about the legal system. It's hard to know how to balance it right. And I mean, us sitting here, we can say this would be good and that would be good, but it is a hard job. And I think they have found, like we said, the logarithms. I think the logarithms seem to be the easiest way for them to do it, but it's not necessarily the best way. But it seems to be the easiest way, and that is a pity. Now, last time we talked was after the election. So I wanted to ask you, now you had some ideas on how you thought things would go. How do you think the political arena has gone that you thought it would, and how do you think it went differently? What do you think about that? So in 2021, what do you think about how that went?
Well, unfortunately, I think some of my expectations were disappointed because the pandemic has gone on for a lot longer than I expected, and I think than many other people expected. At the very least, I thought that by this time we would be in a kind of winding down phase of the pandemic. And unfortunately, we're still in an escalating phase. So what that means is that people are strained. And when they're strained, sometimes that gives rise to additional societal tensions as well. And so this dynamic of polarization that you mentioned, where there are various media outlets that seem to be essentially custom tailored to one side of the partisan divide or another, that dynamic has become exacerbated, where unfortunately more and more aspects of life are becoming politicized. So we have politicized stances on vaccines or masks now, which shouldn't be politicized at all. It should just be a matter of objectively evaluating the evidence and following the practices that tend to maximize the outcomes for protecting human lives and overcoming disease. But unfortunately, just like the choices of where one shops or what food one consumes or what clothing one wears have become politicized, so has this. And as I like to say, in the Transhumanist Party, we oppose politicizing science. We wish to scientize politics, so that instead of this tribal thinking of the right wing versus the left wing, or my side versus your side, we think about policies and what policies are best for maximizing human flourishing, overcoming the problems that are shared problems for us, just like this pandemic is a shared problem, and reaching a better era of humanity. But it seems to me that in 2021, because of all of these crises, not just the pandemic, but the political polarization, the inflation, the supply chain disruptions, the other health crises that seem to have affected people to a disproportionate extent, deaths from other diseases, as you mentioned, like cancer and heart disease, many people's attentions have essentially become compressed in a very short time span, because when people are dealing with emergencies, when they're dealing with crises, when they feel like the future is uncertain, unfortunately, they have less time to look further out. And that has exacerbated societal instability and tension. How do we get past that? It's very difficult in the short term because not everything is under one's control. I would just urge people to keep the bigger picture in mind. And again, keep in mind that this is a particularly challenging moment in history, but we have the ability, I think, and I hope, to get through it. And if we get through it to a time where the background of human day-to-day lives is more stable, more predictable from day to day, then we can focus more substantially on the innovations. And in the meantime, I think humans ought to start thinking more creatively about how to adjust to this world that we find ourselves in. I think a lot of the problems stem from people trying to adapt certain mindsets, like the partisan left versus right mindsets that predated the pandemic, but really break down in the course of this kind of disruption. So I think it's time for people to abandon those kinds of divisive old labels and start thinking of shared problems that we need to solve and shared opportunities that we need to take advantage of for the benefit of all of humanity.
Yeah, through this all, talking about the left and the right and the polarization, I felt up to a number of years ago that the left and right really wasn't as left and right as it had been. I felt they were getting more into the gray with each other, but now it seems to have become very polar. And my question sometimes, I wonder if one of the sides would all of a sudden start agreeing with the other side. I feel like the other side would just switch to the other view on purpose, just to have that polarization, and because they want that. It seems like they want the friction. It doesn't seem like they really want to come to an understanding of each other. They want to be polar, and it's kind of interesting to me. That's just how I feel. I feel they want. Right. They seem to be instigating it and perpetuating it and keeping it going, and it's a pity. But so now, talked about 21. Now we're going into 22. I've heard some predictions that Trump is going to be laying it on strong towards the end of 22. The predictions I hear for another election coming up. I've also heard that maybe he won't end up running after all this barking. And I don't know. Well, what are your thoughts on the future and how things might go in 2022?
Well, in terms of American partisan politics, I think the Democrats are going to have a very difficult time in 2022 because they prevailed somewhat narrowly in 2020 based on the expectation that they would get this pandemic under control, that they would implement a course that is more grounded in science and will try to essentially heal the country. But because in many respects of various events outside of their control, they failed to do that, but they've also failed to do that because of a lack of imagination and because they actually ended up continuing many of Trump's policies. And one could very readily imagine an alternate universe in which Trump had won the 2020 elections and pursued many of the same policies, maybe not identical policies, but substantively quite similar policies as the Biden administration today, with similar results, except then the frustration would have been directed at the Republicans. So essentially, I think the electorate in 2022 is just going to be reacting against a deeply suboptimal status quo. And they're going to want change, whatever that change is. And unfortunately, in the American two-party system, that just means every time this happens, the two parties will flip-flop in power, but no substantive shifts in policy will occur. At least the shifts in policy are not so much dependent on the party in power, whether it's the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. Keep in mind, it was the administration of Donald Trump that initiated Operation Warp Speed to accelerate the development of the COVID-19 vaccines. And it was the Democrats in 2020 that tried to halt the approvals until after the election. And then the stances on vaccination switched, like a 180-degree reversal on both of the political parties, exactly the kind of dynamic that you were discussing. If one party starts approaching the other will take an abrupt turn and start espousing dramatically different views than before. So those who value principles, those who value ideological consistency, are not going to find that in either the Democratic or the Republican parties. So what could be some of the determining factors of how the 2022 elections turn out? First of all, what will happen with the pandemic? If the situation improves dramatically, then I think that may enable some existing Democratic office holders to maintain office. Also, what will happen on the foreign policy front? The more stable and peaceful international relations are, the more likely it is that the electorate is going to be happy. But if, for instance, the Biden administration gets the United States involved in a war, that's going to be deeply problematic. And I think that's going to result in a lot of frustration, because right now the American electorate wants to focus on the problems that are immediate in their lives. The supply chain disruptions, the price inflation, which has hit hard for a lot of people, and the exorbitant costs of housing, the exorbitant costs of healthcare, and for some people, the exorbitant costs of education. Those are problems that need to be addressed in this country. And unfortunately, the institutions are so gridlocked and so polarized that constructive solutions are not really being explored. I think technology can essentially cut each of those Gordian knots, so to speak. With education, we can rely a lot more on electronic and remote learning. With healthcare, we can advance biotechnology and also dramatically accelerate FDA review and approval timeframes and allow patients the right to try in many, many more instances. And with housing, we need to build a lot more housing, and emerging technologies will facilitate that as well. There are already neighborhoods built in the United States of 3D printed homes, and this is a relatively young technology. There was recent article in The Atlantic by Derek Thompson talking about the need for an abundance agenda. He was mentioning how in America, a lot of incumbent players within the system have injected artificial scarcity in virtually every area of life. And we need to overcome that. We need to have enough, more than enough, to meet the needs of every American and then some. And we should do that in the realms of housing. We should do that in the realms of healthcare, with allowing many more people to become qualified healthcare practitioners, doctors and nurses, for instance. In the realms of immigration, letting in a lot more skilled immigrants who can fill labor shortages in this country. In the realms of infrastructure, embracing ambitious clean energy projects, because clean energy is becoming a lot more affordable, but that means embracing large-scale nuclear plant construction and solar panel arrays as well. And also, of course, accelerating medical research in cures for diseases, cures for aging to the greatest extent possible. So this kind of abundance agenda, if it's implemented, could overcome a lot of the day-to-day suffering that Americans face. And I think we're in an interesting situation right now where the existing system, this polarized two-party system that really serves to divide people while maintaining the status quo in terms of policy, is, I think, nearing an end, because people are fed up with it, both on the right and the left. It's just they need to take that extra step in realizing that it's not just their immediate ideological opponents who are the problem, it's the entire system that is the problem. And once they step outside of this mind frame of perpetual rivalry, then perhaps they'll realize there is a much more promising spectrum of solutions available to be implemented essentially as soon as enough people agree to take those steps.
Yeah, some good points. I know when I worked at the energy office, you talked about laborers and stuff, and there is an issue with that where, even you talk about fuel and we don't have enough drivers, you don't have enough people, there's technology for solar and stuff and new buildings of houses that they're more efficient, and you don't have the workers that are trained to do it or to do it. And some of it's just the way regulations have changed. People don't want to do it because they don't make as much money as they once did, and different issues. You know what I mean? Like truck drivers at one time used to be able to drive a lot more, and they're restricted in that, so they don't care as much because they don't make as much money because they can't drive all night or all day and stuff. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, but it's a pity because it does affect us moving ahead with things. Now we talked about politics and different things. Wanted to ask you now, as the chairman of the United States Transhumanist Party, what do you have going forward? What new things do you have planned for the coming year and for the future? What things do you have that you're working on to tell the people about?
Well, we do have some ambitious plans for 2022. First of all, we're going to be continuing with our Virtual Enlightenment Salons every week, every Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Those are great venues to bring in fascinating speakers and discuss ideas in a wide array of disciplines, and hopefully continue to coalesce our community of creative thinkers and innovators so that we can come up with solutions to many of the problems that we've discussed. And along these lines, we're also going to be expanding our website with the help of our Director of Publications, Zach Richardson. We have accelerated our publication schedule once again, so we hope to produce a lot more content, even as frequently as on a daily basis. We'll see if that will become a possibility. I'm also hoping to start building out the Transhuman Club, which is the affiliate organization to the US Transhumanist Party, with the difference that it is not a political organization. So it can reach those segments of society that might not be immediately interested in politics, but they are interested in science and technology and how to apply emerging technologies for the benefit of their own lives, for extending the length of life as well as improving the quality of life. So the Transhuman Club hopefully is going to have an expanded online presence. It will be able to accept donations. It will be able to host events, local meetups, or presentations in particular areas where we have members. We hope to build additional ties with our allied organizations in the transhumanist movement and in the life extension community. And we hope to, of course, create a lot of new media. And by that, I mean not just the Virtual Enlightenment Salon recordings, but also shorter videos that draw people into the movement. Our legislative director, Jason Geringer, is working on an educational curriculum for our recent members, but also for anyone who's interested. Anyone in the public will be able to access our curriculum for free. And what we're hoping to do is give people a more structured introduction to transhumanism and the values of the US Transhumanist Party, the platform of the US Transhumanist Party, and the goals that our organization seeks to achieve. Because while a lot of people have been in the transhumanist community for a long time, I think for someone coming in, the ideas are fascinating, but often people need some guidance. They need a step-by-step approach to help them fully grasp the nature and the implications of the transhumanist worldview. And on a more personal level, I'm hoping that I can release an updated edition of my illustrated children's book, Death is Wrong. That book was published in 2013, and so many developments have occurred in life extension research, in technological progress more generally, but also in terms of my activism, my involvement with the Transhumanist Party being the most prominent example of this. So all of these developments, I think, deserve to be mentioned in the book, and I'm going to hopefully crowdsource additional illustrations as well. So if you are an aspiring artist or an established artist and you want to collaborate with me on this project, please reach out to me, because I am thinking this edition, well, it's actually going to be the third edition, because technically the one I released in late 2013 was the second edition, but this expanded edition is going to be significantly larger than the original, and I think it has the potential to reach many more people.
Yeah, I have a copy of the book. It's enjoyable, and it's a good point. You put it back on yourself about when you were a kid and your thoughts, and I like the book. I think it's a good thing to have, and it introduces it to young people, which is good for them to think about. I like you said about moving ahead. I just was having in my mind before I think we started talking. We talked about me doing some work with Explore Mars. It would be nice if get to the point where we would have a Transhumanist Party conference once a year in DC. That would even be nice, if that was a possibility. Years ago, I used to do one with music, legal music party that had one in DC, and now I've been working with the Explore Mars down there. And the thing about having these kind of meetings, conferences in DC, you can get people that are down there then to participate and speak, because it's not like you have them coming in from far places. There's a lot of people in DC already there that could come and speak, and that would be kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'd be interesting to have a yearly conference. I don't know what you think, but so hopefully someday in the future that could be something to do.
It's an interesting idea. Now, there is a DC Transhumanist Meetup group that was co-founded by our friend Skip Siddiqui, who had been a previous guest on our Virtual Enlightenment Salon, and he and his associates held fairly regular meetings prior to the pandemic. Of course, the pandemic disrupted this, but hopefully if the pandemic does subside in 2022, then we can start thinking about those kinds of events again and reach out to the DC transhumanists and others in the area. I know our friend and member, Dr. Edward Hudgens of the Human Achievement Alliance, is based in that area as well. And hopefully we could start thinking about outreach to policymakers as well, because the Transhumanist Party, while we certainly are not fond of the two-party system and the partisan divide, we're willing to collaborate with any politicians who share our goals. So whatever the party affiliations of those individuals are, it doesn't matter as long as we can reach agreement on specific policy measures that we wish to promote. And that doesn't even require those politicians to adhere to all of the platform planks of the Transhumanist Party or the transhumanist vision. It just means instrumental collaboration where that could bring some incremental benefits in implementing that vision. And I do think we can get a lot of allies among people who, for whatever reason, value the prospect of longer and healthier lives. Maybe even for economic considerations, some politicians may be interested in life extension and rejuvenation treatments, because that means a much smaller burden on the Medicare system if people are healthier for longer. So hopefully we can spread that kind of messaging. And if we can have a post-pandemic conference in DC, I would be thrilled to do that. I think if we can get some sort of confidence that we're finally out of this very dark period of our history, then there will be a celebratory mood in this country, and a lot of people will be quite eager to go to conferences, to organize conferences, to resume doing the activities that were so difficult to do and continue to be fairly difficult to do because of all of the risks that one has to consider. But my hope is that we will be out of this sooner rather than later. Of course, I can't predict the future, but it's well past time for us to be out of this. And so I just hope that our technology as well as our good luck will align to make that happen.
When you were talking there, it made me start envisioning a conference where maybe all parties could come and talk, and we could have Democrats, Republicans, Green Party, Libertarians. At the same conference, we could have somebody representing all the different parties to talk, because we're kind of outside that. That's not what we're about. So that would be nice. I'm disappointed you said you couldn't make predictions. That's what I wanted this show for. I wanted you to be the amazing Karnak. And make your predictions. I forget, who used to do that every year? The amazing Kreskin used to do his predictions for the year, and there used to be a bunch of psychics that used to do that. Disappointed you can't do that, Bill. But I've had you over 45 minutes, so I'm probably going to let you go. Is there anything, a couple things I want you to tell people. Some people that catch this might not know you. I'm sure a lot of people do. But if you wanted to mention some websites and places they can go to find out stuff, if you wanted to mention that, and also anything else you might have pressing on your mind that you'd want to say to people out there before we close.
Of course. First of all, thank you very much, John. I always enjoy our conversations. For people who want to know more about me, I would recommend going to my personal website, which is The Rational Argumentator, rationalargumentator.com, and also the Transhumanist Party website, transhumanist-party.org, which we update frequently with posts about new developments within science, technology, medicine, and of course, transhumanist politics. Also, please visit my YouTube channel, youtube.com/GStolyarov, the first letter of my first name, then my last name followed by 2 I's. That's where we have the videos of the Virtual Enlightenment Salons and others of my videos as well. You can watch all of our recordings. We now have over 200 hours of video footage from just the Virtual Enlightenment Salons that we've done since the pandemic began. So that's quite remarkable in retrospect. You can also find me on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. The US Transhumanist Party has an Instagram account spelled together, US Transhumanist Party. The US Transhumanist Party has a Twitter account too. Our Twitter handle is US Transhumanists. So find us on all of those venues, follow us there. In terms of closing thoughts, the prospect of a conference where politicians from various parties are invited reminded me of our open debate in Chicago at the Chicago Hilton Hotel on March 4th, 2020, right before the pandemic restrictions were imposed, because we had 18 candidates there debating from 8 political parties. And we even had Zoltan Istvan, who founded the Transhumanist Party, but he was running as a Republican. And we had a few politicians running as Democrats. Mosey Boyd, for example, was seeking the Democratic presidential nomination. And of course, we had Libertarians, we had the Green Party, we had the Constitution Party, we had the American Solidarity Party. So we sought the representation of all political parties. And this was hosted by the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. I was pleased to have provided financial support for that debate. But what I was really hoping was for a civil discussion where people could present their perspectives on a variety of issues in a way that offered constructive alternatives to the duopoly's positions. And indeed, this was the most civil debate of the election season, I would say. If you contrast that with what happened between Donald Trump and Joe Biden later on in 2020, there's really no comparison, because I think Trump and Biden were closer to one another on many of the issues than a lot of the candidates we had debating in Chicago. But no candidate in the Chicago debate was unkind to any other candidate. They were all extremely respectful. And Trump and Biden couldn't stop shouting over one another. So that's just the contrast that arises when you have the correct intentions, when you go into politics viewing it as a venue to discuss issues, to educate people, to inform people, rather than having this zero-sum combat between two sides. So I'm really hoping we can have a venue again that will also bring in people of many political persuasions from many parties, many groups, and facilitate those kinds of conversations. Again, certainly I'm happy to have the experience of the Virtual Enlightenment Salons that will definitely enable me to play an effective role as a moderator and someone who brings these diverse individuals together.
Yeah, I was there with you in Chicago, and that was a great event. I do think the virtual things are great and fantastic. I do think, though, that the in-person things, we need more of them again, because there's a different chemistry that happens with the in-person things, I think, that doesn't happen with the virtual stuff. And I'm big on technology, but I do think in-person is still a necessary. Maybe not as much as it was, but I think that's still a necessary, and that getting together. And that was kind of like our last hurrah right before the lockdown, was us being in Chicago. And that is weird how I think it was like the next week or a week and a half after that we all got locked down. So
yes, exactly. I was lucky to have been able to get home from Chicago just in time before the lockdowns. Otherwise, I'm not sure what would have happened. I might have been trapped there. But I'll also point out, perhaps in the future, we'll have fully immersive virtual reality conferences where instead of just looking at one another on a screen, we will be in virtual environments where it will be as if we're sitting across the table from one another in the same room. And there might even be some haptic interfaces that we'll take advantage of. So we might feel sensations like touch as well.
I do know, because I do some movie work on the side, and one of my friends he's also passed away from cancer, but he said that the 3D and interactive TV and stuff, which would lead to that, is the future. And he talked about the fact that sports was going to be one of the things that really pushed that, where people could watch sports and look at it from different angles and really kind of get into the game if they wanted to, or crawl around and look at what happened, and you can look at it. So it's interesting sometimes, like what pushes things. And I could see sports pushing that, but also if this lockdown goes longer, I could see that pushing that technology also, because people wanting the more, like you said, interaction. And when you said about sensations, I didn't see it too much. I know they have them in this country, but when I was over in Dublin, I almost went to see Godzilla, and they had one of those 4D movie theaters where the seats shook. They put mist on you. They put scent in it. They heated you. They blew wind on you, so that while you were watching the movie, you kind of felt immersed in it. And I almost did it for Godzilla, because the Godzilla movie seems like it would be one of the best movies to do that. Have your seats shake and the heat and the wind. But I do think we are moving that way. But I still think we need some of the personal things too. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm old, but I do think there's a different thing. I enjoyed talking to you this way, but meeting you in person was a great experience. And I know I had tried to reenact interviews in person before I got a little sicker again. I went out and interviewed Dave in person and Dan in person from the Transhumanist Party, and that was great. Our candidate in New Jersey there, I interviewed her in person the one time, and I was trying to get out and do that more. That gives you a little bit of a different take, and I think it's all good. I am glad. I do think, though, that the virtual enables us to be more flexible and to do more things. Like if I had to interview every time in person, it would get expensive for both of us.
Yes, indeed. But hopefully we will get to meet in person not too long from now, maybe even this year.
Well, next time I'm in Nevada, I have to visit you. Last time I went down into Phoenix, into Arizona, and visited Dave. Next time I have to visit you. So that's I thought about that last time, but yet you were kind of further away. I had my sister with me. I wanted to show her some things, and you were a little bit. It was closer to get to Dave with the way I wanted to go. But next time you're on the route. Next time. That's either a promise or a threat. I'm not sure which.
Well, I look forward to it. Anytime you're in the vicinity, just let me know.
Well, thanks again. We're going to have to do another one of these maybe mid to the end of the year. I think next time our topic should be about the upcoming elections as far as the next presidential election. and what the Transhumanist Party is looking at doing. It really is not that far off yet. It'll be coming up on us soon. I think sometimes my view of time is a little different because I'm older and time goes faster. I said that to someone, time seems to go faster to me. So people say, oh, well, that's months away. I said, well, months away, that's a blink of the eye, So we're already in 2022. Next election is 2024. This is the time to start looking at that, and we can start talking about that and what we're going to do. I know there's some different ideas of doing it different this time, and that I think will be a great topic for maybe our next talk. So,
yes, indeed.
Well, thanks again for being with me, and I look forward to again talking to you in the future, doing some other things with you. I know I'm not as active in the salons as I'd like to be, but my health has been bad, and some days is always a bad day for me. I always love when you guys are going to have it on another night. And a couple times you were going to have it like on a Monday or Tuesday, and then something happened that it was canceled anyhow. I'm like, oh, I was all set to jump on, So, but all right, well, thank you again, and I'll put all your information down below, like they say, and have people check you out and check out the Transhumanist Party. And hopefully people that haven't seen any of this before, hopefully will be interested and become new members.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, John. Live long and prosper.